Thank you for being interested and for taking the time to join us this evening. Uh, I'm Al Bartlett. I am a retired pediatrician and public health physician. Right now, I'm a member of the executive committee and the energy committee of the Maryland chapter of Sierra Club, and I am presently the lead of our 100% clean renewable energy campaign. So I'll be doing part of this presentation, and David Smedick, who is right next to me on my screen. So David, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is David Smedick. I'm the Campaign and Policy Director, a staff member for the Sierra Club Maryland chapter.
Yeah, so David's already up to his ears in the workings of the legislative session, which has just started a week ago in Annapolis. And so just before we get started on content, just a little bit of logistics. Actually, Zach, who also is, Zach, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, very quickly. Hi, everyone. I'm Zach Gertis, a conservation organizer with the chapter, and I will be on tonight to help with the tech end of the webinar.
Yeah, Zach has the master switch. So he is going to mute all of us except the person who's presenting, so we don't get a lot of feedback. Otherwise, it gets pretty crazy. We will go through the whole presentation first because with this many people, if we stop and chat, we'll never get through it. At the end, we'll have time for questions, and there are a couple of ways you can do that. Down at that bottom, if you run your cursor over the screen, you get a little toolbar down at the bottom. There's a chat function, and right along during the course of the presentation, you can type in questions if you have them. So that would be good. And you can also, there's a little, once you get the chat column open, there's a place where you can, quote, raise your hand. It says raise hand. And if you click on that, then Zach will know that you want to speak and ask a question. So, but that's not now, that's at the question period. So let's get going. I will give us our presentation right now. Okay, so we've come together to talk about the Sierra Club Maryland chapter strategy to move Maryland along the legislative path to 100% clean renewable energy during this year's legislative session. But before we dive into politics, I actually want to make one important point, which is that when we're talking about clean energy, we're really talking about climate change. You know, we all know about the fires, the hurricanes, the droughts, the deluges, the heat waves, these flooding in the streets of Annapolis. Climate change is urgent, and our that urgency carries over to the work that we're doing in cleaning up the electricity sector, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. That urgency was reflected just this fall with two important reports, the one from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the other from 13 US government agencies, the fourth National Climate Assessment. They both make the same very important points. One is that climate change is not a future threat. It's already happening here in Maryland. We already know that. It also makes the point that even to avert the worst effects of climate change, we have to act and act urgently beginning now. We cannot wait. And it's particularly true that the next decade is going to be very important. If we do not act ambitiously, aggressively, and urgently during the next decade, by the time we get to 2030, to get to where we actually need to be at the end in 2040 and beyond, is going to be a very heavy lift and potentially impossible to make the changes that we need to make in order to avert the worst effects of climate change, which we would then call climate disaster. So this decade is important, and that has implications for our political process this year. And the connection, of course, with the climate change with the electricity sector which is what we're talking about here, is climate pollution. The carbon pollution that drives climate change. These are Maryland data in this pie chart that show, and they're a little bit old, 2014, but at that point, it was estimated that the two largest sectors contributing to that climate pollution were the electricity sector and transportation. Actually, the latest data show that transportation has actually moved ahead somewhat, partly because we have made some progress in reducing carbon pollution from the electricity sector, partly through demand reduction and energy efficiency, and also through programs like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which has cut down the carbon coming out of the smokestacks of coal-fired power plants. But it's important to remember that one of the important ways we want to clean up transportation, in addition to having more public transportation and all of us riding our bikes more, is electrification of the transportation sector. That is electric vehicles, electric buses, electric trucks, which means that the electricity sector is always going to be fundamental to our ability to deal with carbon pollution and climate change. That said, with that background, let me give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about in terms of what we're doing with our legislative strategy. I'll do some quick background on some very basic points about clean energy, specifically as it relates to 100%, and some background also on how we got to the strategy that we're working on during this legislative session. Then I'll pass it over to David for the heavy lifting, which is actually talking about our legislative package, the strategy we're using to move that package through the legislative process, and most importantly, at the end, how you can help, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So in terms of 100% clean energy, just a few years ago, if you talked about 100% clean energy, people thought you were a futurist or something, that you were from a science fiction story, that it didn't seem realistic. Actually, there is now accelerating movement towards 100% clean energy, and it's serious. The Sierra Club, as many of you know, has the Ready for 100 campaign, aimed mostly at municipalities and counties. And there's also an internal campaign called Clean Energy for All, which is aimed at taking the various programs that the club is involved with and making sure that they connect in ways that promote the achievement of 100% clean energy with equity and justice and fair treatment for the folks in the industries that are going to be affected by that transition to clean energy. We're also seeing real solid commitments. The 100% Ready for 100 campaign now has 100 municipalities, a milestone, and they're still coming in. Some states have already made legislative commitments to achieve 100% clean energy. Hawaii, California, most recently DC, and other states are considering it, Connecticut being one. And of course, there's Maryland, where we're pushing forward as well. And then big corporations and small corporations alike have really been also making commitments to go to 100% clean renewable energy. So it's a real thing, and it makes sense for Sierra Club because clean renewable energy really becomes the bottom line for many of our different campaigns, because when we move beyond coal or beyond gas or beyond nuclear, what are we moving towards? The answer has to be 100% clean renewable energy. And the best news is that 100% clean renewable energy is now both feasible and affordable. These two graphs from Lazard, which is a well-respected analyst of the economics of the energy sector, show just in the last 10 years the remarkable drops of cost in both onshore wind and, on the right-hand side, utility scale solar, to the point now where onshore wind and utility scale solar are competitive with, and in some cases cheaper than, fossil fuel generated electricity. And offshore wind, which is one of the greatest potential clean renewable resources that Maryland has access to, also made a big step this year. because just this year, Massachusetts awarded a 20-year contract to buy the power generated by initially 800 megawatts of offshore wind at a price of 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour. That price is actually, just for the electricity, is actually a bit lower than what you and I are paying BGE or Pepco for our electricity, not including the delivery and the taxes and all the other charges they put on your bill. But that's an excellent price, which means that it was thought that offshore wind would be too expensive for a long time, but this changes the game. And in fact, Massachusetts has doubled down and doubled again. They're now talking about 3,200 megawatts of offshore wind power under long-term contracts. And one of the important points about this, in addition to the great effect on offshore wind price, is that shows how long-term contracts work. Basically, by the people that wanted to build this project getting this contract, it provides the solar developer with a steady stream of revenue that they can, and it's a contract, so they can count on it. They can take it to the bank or to the venture capital people or whoever is financing them and say, look, give us the money because we will be able to pay you back. And this is the kind of direct link that a long-term contract makes between the development, the financing, the contract itself, and the development of new, clean, renewable energy sources. So it's a great example. Just one other thing quickly, battery storage is continuing to expand. I mean, there's the Tesla wall, the thing you put in your garage, but actually it's now at utility scale, so that California recently announced it's going to take 3 gas, what are called peaker plants, that is plants that come online when the demand is very high, like everyone's running their air conditioners. But they're going to replace those plants with battery storage, so that at times when there's plentiful power being generated by wind and solar, the extra can be stored and then put online afterwards. And that means that has tremendous implications for the future of expanding clean energy. So technically, we know exactly that we can do it. It's feasible, it's affordable, it's getting cheaper, and more technologically advanced all the time. So let's turn to the politics. And actually, it's the politics that are the bigger problem. We have the technology, but we are working on moving our state towards 100% clean energy. How did we get to where we are? I think probably most of you know, maybe all of you know, that last year in the legislative session, there were 2 different bills that came from the environment community to update our renewable portfolio standard, which presently ends in 2020. There was the Clean Energy Jobs Act, or CEJA, and the 100% Renewable Energy and Equity Act, or what we call the 100% bill. And they had some important similarities, and they dealt with many of the same things, but in some cases differently. So the CEJA had a 50% target for the renewable portfolio standard, which is the law that says how much of our energy has to come from sources that we call renewable. So the RPS target for CEJA, as it's known, was 50%, and for the 100% bill was 100% by 2035. They differed in mechanism. The CEJA used the mechanism we have now, which is renewable energy credits. And what that means, some of you know, is that we pay a little bit extra on our bills to pay for electricity, for the fact that electricity was generated somewhere and put onto the grid by some source that we call renewable, not all of which in Maryland's definition is clean, but that includes wind, solar, but also things like trash incineration and wood burning and black liquor, which is a byproduct of paper manufacturing, and landfill gas and some other things that actually produce carbon and other pollution. But the renewable energy credits is the mechanism we use now. The 100% bill said we're going to just stop all that and move to a long-term clean energy contracts, maybe a little abrupt perhaps, but that was the proposal. Both bills proposed a substantial increase in solar. In terms of offshore wind, the CEJA allowed for an increase in offshore wind, but didn't require it. Whereas the 100% bill required it, and that was considered to be important because without that legislative or government commitment to actually require an increased amount of offshore wind, the offshore wind industry would not have the security it needs to actually invest in the jobs and the industrial development, the things that we would like to see come here to Maryland. In terms of those combustible, or what we call the dirty sources, the CEJA proposed removing waste incineration. The 100% bill said get rid of them all. Politically a heavy lift. In terms of job training, both programs provided substantial amount for training for new clean energy jobs. And in terms of equity and justice, the CEJA provided substantial support for small minority and women-owned businesses, and the 100% bill focused instead on capping energy costs for low-income ratepayers. So similar in some ways, different in some important ways, but at the end of the process, a legislator said to us, look guys, get your act together. We would like to see one position from the environment community. So how have we responded? We've actually worked pretty hard at this. During the summer and throughout the fall, there was some pretty intense technical and political analysis, starting with the commissioning of a study of both bills by the Vermont Law School's Institute for Energy and Environment. And we all worked on multiple drafts of that to make it as technically sound as possible. That led to a presentation and discussion with the Climate Coalition members by the Vermont team, and that was about a 4-hour meeting of very deep technical discussion. We had follow-up meetings to talk more technical and also about policy and politics. And one outcome of that was discussion and agreement on some changes to the Clean Energy Jobs Act, perhaps not all that we wanted, and that you'll hear more about that. Can I just ask Zach, my computer just flickered. Am I still on?
Yes, you are good.
Thank you. Okay. I don't know what happened. So I'm just going to make one last point, which is that this technical analysis process that we went through of these two bills brought into focus a very important point, and one that's fundamental if we're talking about climate change. And that's the concept of additionality. What do we mean by that? It means that whatever mechanism, whatever approach we use to increase our clean energy or renewable energy should be judged by how effective it is in actually promoting the development of new clean renewable energy sources. And that's critically important because the whole bottom line is we want to move from fossil fuel energy sources to clean renewable energy sources. And so if the main thing we have to be doing as we think about the approach we're taking is focusing on how well are we doing that. And there are a number of ways that we can do it. There are several actually, but a few that are important to our legislation this year. One is to create carve-outs for specific energy resources. What that means is we have to have a certain amount of solar. We have to have a certain amount of offshore wind. It's in the law. That makes those things happen. Another way is to actually take some of those what we call dirty sources, the combustibles that generate carbon and other pollutants. And if you take more of those out, that leaves more room under whatever level of RPS target you have in that year, leaves more room for clean energy sources. And the third way is to use long-term contracts, the way Massachusetts did, to actually purchase electricity from clean energy sources that are specified by the contract. So that takes us up to the legislative process. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to David.
Great. Thank you very much, Al. So again, the voice you're hearing, for those of you that can't see me, is this is David Smedick. I'm our Campaign and Policy Director, a staff member at the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. So I'm going to give the next, 10, 12 minutes or so of the discussion, but we want to leave plenty of time for questions, remarks, chime-ins, all sorts of fun stuff. So I see a couple people are chiming into the chat box periodically. If you have questions that come up while Al was talking, you got an idea, or as I'm talking now, feel free to add that into the chat box, and then we will read it, answer it, discuss it, etc. as we move forward. And we'll also provide an opportunity for folks to ask questions too. We'll unmute folks when we get to there. So Al just did a fantastic job laying the groundwork, talking about where we were a year ago, and now I'm ready to talk about where we are now. I think that we are really, really excited for what we are advocating for in the Maryland General Assembly this year. We know that we need a big clean energy bill passed by the General Assembly and signed by Governor Hogan so that we can get on that pathway to 100% clean energy that we know we can do. So the environmental community has gathered around advocacy for a single vehicle, a single bill, but we have a couple tweaks and asks about what we all kind of want in that space. But this is a better strategy for us moving together as a community. So the bill that we anticipate being introduced and proposed is called the Clean Energy Jobs Act. You'll reference that was the previous name of last year's bill, but there are some updates to it. So this year, what we anticipate being introduced and getting back from all those lovely bill drafters that are working away in Annapolis is, number one, an RPS target mandate for 50% renewable energy by 2030, as well as a supplemental requirement to create a plan for the state to get to 100% clean energy by 2040. It's really exciting. We're excited about that. The mechanism within that will be a variety of renewable energy credits. We're looking at specific credits for solar. That means that we get a nice carve out to address the additionality aspects that Al mentioned. So we're looking at 14.5% of Maryland's energy would be coming from solar by the end of, actually a little bit before the end of next decade, but that's a minimum that would be required from that space is 14.5%. And we are also looking at offshore wind renewable energy credits. So we have direct contracts with offshore wind developments that would move to approximately 10% of our in-state energy generation coming from offshore wind by 2030. And you can remember that last year, Al had mentioned there was the option for us to use more offshore wind. The bill, as we are advocating for, would require that increase in offshore wind, which is really, really exciting. The reason that's so important is because Maryland is in a race with those other states that Al mentioned. Massachusetts and New York are making really big, exciting commitments to the offshore wind industry, and we need Maryland to be doing the same. The reason of that is not just because we like to compete and we like to fight climate change, but we also need to attract the industries associated with offshore wind to Baltimore. We have a really big, exciting port in Baltimore, and we need to make sure that we can ship the offshore wind industry parts up and down the East Coast. We have companies that are eyeing where on the East Coast they want to land and headquarter and do manufacturing and all sorts of things. And we want to make sure that Baltimore attracts the economic development opportunity of the clean energy economy, specifically through offshore wind. So we need these big increases in offshore wind commitments so that we can actually make sure that happens. The next thing I want to highlight is the removal of probably one of the dirtiest sources of energy that still qualifies as clean for Maryland, and that is trash incineration. So our renewable portfolio standard program puts trash incineration on the same level as wind and solar, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. So we're getting that big smokestack as you drive in and out of Baltimore that says Baltimore on it, advertises our city. On the smokestack is actually a trash incinerator. Those things pump out mercury, lead, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide. The incinerator in Baltimore City is actually the single largest point source of pollution for the city, and it is put on the same level as a solar farm that we have out in, say, Frederick County. They're equated the same under this program, which is pretty remarkable. So we're actually proposing in the baseline bill, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, that qualification would be removed for trash incinerators. In addition, we're looking at how are we actually promoting growth in the clean energy economy and making sure that we have the workforce available to install all the solar panels, grow the offshore wind resources and land-based wind and all sorts of stuff. So there's a lot of funding, millions of dollars as a baseline again for this bill that's going to be allocated to workforce development funds in the clean energy space and energy efficiency space. So making sure that we have the people ready to go out and do the work that we know needs to be done, and making sure that those are as high quality jobs as possible. In addition, we're looking at nearly $20 million invested specifically into capital for the minority and women-owned businesses. There's actually an Office of Minority and Women-Owned Businesses within, I believe, the Department of Commerce, but I need to go double check that. But here in Maryland, we have specific efforts to try to make sure that we are getting more diversity and having a more inclusive space for our local owned businesses in Maryland, and making sure that we're having better representation from minority communities and women-owned businesses. So we're really excited about that. And those are specifically more toward the clean energy space from those minority and women-owned businesses as well. So that's a quick rundown of what the baseline bill that will be introduced is going to target. It's exciting stuff. And that being said, the Sierra Club we exist to push the envelope. So we actually want to see this bill strengthened. And we are really excited about what we're pushing. So Al, I think the next slide is going to talk about what the Sierra Club wants to do. So our clean energy strategy is to advocate around two primary pieces of legislation, one being the Clean Energy Jobs Act to strengthen it, and another one that I'll mention a little bit more about in a second is the long-term contracts bill. So what we want to see strengthened within the Clean Energy Jobs Act is to actually increase the total target to 60% renewable energy by 2030. That puts us on the better trajectory and the trajectory that we believe needs to be in place for us to actually hit those report requirements that Al mentioned at the beginning of the call. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is suggesting that developed nations like the US actually really need to be seen closer to 60% clean energy by 2030. So we need to kind of bump that up, make sure that we're actually moving forward in the direction that we need to, and be a little bit more aggressive there. In addition to the trash incineration piece within the Clean Energy Jobs Act, the Sierra Club is really concerned about some of the other combustion-based products within the RPS that qualify the same as non-emitting resources like wind and solar. Very specifically, you can get the same amount of credit for burning wood waste products. And we have a lot of concerns around that range from the potential inadvertent incentive of deforestation practices in the Southeast, that as they're cutting down trees, for whatever reason, you get some of the byproducts from that and the scraps that are then pelletized and you burn in a regular power plant facility. So as you think about that, you're burning wood. If anybody has a fireplace, you know that you need to clean your fireplace. You get some soot build up, you get lots of stuff coming out. So there are particulates, there are other pollution issues associated with those wood waste facilities that qualify the same way as wind and solar. For the Sierra Club, we also want to see those eliminated or capped or some way dealt with within our work within the Clean Energy Jobs Act. So to summarize it, we want all those things that are on the list from the previous slide in the Clean Energy Jobs Act, but we want to increase the higher target to go to 60% by 2030, and we want to remove woody byproducts and wood waste as a qualifying resources, as well as trash incineration. So we're working a lot on that and trying to get people in the legislature excited about those amendments and introducing them and working that bill to make it even stronger. The last piece that I wanted to mention is our sister bill, as we kind of coin it, a long-term contracts bill. Al mentioned how important the idea of contracting with specific clean energy developments and clean energy projects is to providing financial stability for them, making sure that we're getting new clean energy projects associated with contracts for the state. So this bill would require that half of our clean energy program would be associated with long-term contracts to specific clean energy spaces that are contracted for both the energy associated with the plant as well as the renewable energy credit. So you're kind of threading the needle there to make sure that there's new clean energy coming online that is tied to specific investments associated with our renewable portfolio standard. So that's a separate bill, but we are excited about it, and obviously there's a lot of interconnection between that, and we're going to be working on both of those really, really hard. Next slide, please. Great. So the key point, Sierra Club is always here to activate our grassroots base. Our volunteers are our lifeblood. We need you guys to be contacting your elected officials and doing so in a strategic way. So I'm gonna, in the next couple slides, I'll have a list of legislators and things, but there are so many ways to get involved in the campaign without even necessarily contacting your legislator first. So there are ways for us to spread the word locally. We have lots of films that we can show. Reinventing Power is a truly inspiring film that was made by the Sierra Club with some professional filmmakers that talks about how we can get to 100% clean energy. Organize a film screening. That's really, really exciting. You can just get 10, 15, 20, 30 people out to a film screening, and then you all get excited about how you can take action next. We need people to write. We need letters to the editor submitted to the newspapers. Whenever you see any story about air pollution, climate change, solar, wind, coal, gas, whatever it may be, write a letter in response and talk about how we need the General Assembly to act on clean energy this year and set a 60% RPS target for us. If you're really into writing and want to do more than just 250 words, consider writing an op-ed. Anybody can submit a longer opinion piece, 700 words or less typically, submit them to the Baltimore Sun, the Washington Post, provide a little bit more beef in that explanation of why you care about clean energy and what you want to see happen in the General Assembly. A huge one, our Sierra Club annual lobby night, Monday, February 25th. Put it on your calendar, register with us. It is our single largest event of the year. We bring out 250 plus people every single year to the General Assembly and the Annapolis halls. You get to lobby your personal elected official, one of your 3 delegates, your senator. We set up the meetings for you. You go in and talk about why you care about clean energy and want to see climate action for the state of Maryland. Then you advocate for these bills that we are talking about right now. That's really, really important. That's somewhere where you bring your neighbors. It is the single most influential night that Sierra Club has at the General Assembly because the legislators care about their constituents. You vote them in, you tell them what you want, they better pass it or you can vote them out. That's a big deal for the lobby night. We have digital action alerts. We will have action alerts that ask you to call your legislators, turn out to hearings, turn out to rallies, all sorts of things will be getting into your hands that you can then spread far and wide. And we really, really hope that you attend all those sorts of things. We have so much that you can do. It's too much to really fit on the slide. So if you are interested, contact Al, contact me, contact Zach, contact just our general office number, and we'll be sure to get you plugged into our campaign. Can you check the next one? Thank you, Al. So I mentioned key legislators. There are plenty. So this is our Senate Finance Committee. This is where the bill, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, will be introduced and where we are advocating for it to be strengthened. If we are successful in our advocacy, this is the place where we'll see those amendments added on. So the bolded names are folks that we want to really influence hard. The chairwoman, Dolores Kelly from Baltimore County, she is one of our biggest targets. We've worked well with her on a lot of issues. She's in a new position as chair of this committee. She holds a lot of power over it. She chooses what they're going to vote on, what they're not going to vote on, and does a lot of really good work. So if you notice any of these names, you are in any of these districts, your cousin is any of these districts, your friends, consider how you can take some of those actions from the previous slide and influence them. As you know, as I can mention though, Senator Brian Feldman is not bolded because he is the sponsor of the bill, which we're really excited about. He's done a lot of good clean energy work in the past. So those folks are our key targets. We need to influence them, we need to win them over, and we need to tell them why we need our strengthened amendments onto the Clean Energy Jobs Act. And that's in the Senate. I think the next slide is in the House. So the House Economic Matters Committee, it is a shorter list. It is a longer, full cohort of people on the committee. But these are the folks that we are looking at targeting to really champion those strengthening amendments that we want. So Delegate Balderrama, Delegate Lasanti, Delegate Charkoudian, and Delegate Brooks are all really key targets for us, telling them that we want to strengthen Clean Energy Jobs Act and that we have ways for them to strengthen it. So if you're in any of those districts or you know those folks, these are the places where we are building teams. All of the folks that were bolded on the previous slide and this slide, we need your help to phone bank people in these spaces, to email them, to write letters if you really want to do that, but phone banking and email is usually easier. We need to build teams of 3 to 4 really dedicated people that want to go out and lobby these folks. So we have lists of people for you to call, to get them excited about clean energy, get them out to lobby night, and make sure that we are talking to these key folks from that district to strengthen the Clean Energy Jobs Act and pass a good clean energy bill. So next slide. This is, again, some of the ways where you can tell us that you want to get more involved. Legislation@mdsierra.org is our catch-all. If you just email that, we will get you plugged into this campaign. And you can also learn more about this and our other campaigns for this legislative session on our website, which is linked there. So is that our last slide, Al? There we go. We're questions. So I think we got a whole bunch in the chat box already. It may take, Al, I don't know if you were looking at that. It may take me a moment to read through them. Or Zach, do you have any insight into some of these?
I was just going to say, let's definitely go through the chat questions first. And then anyone on the line who has a question that hasn't typed in a question, feel free to type it in chat or hit the raise your hand option. And once we get through chat, we will call through those as well. Yeah, why don't we just walk through these one at a time. The bottom one is, what are the biggest challenges to pass the Clean Energy Jobs Act bill this year?
David, I think that's yours. Right.
All right. So it's simply getting the votes. And what I think we need to really do is make sure that a couple things. People recognize the importance of offshore wind. They recognize the importance of removing trash incineration from qualification. That's one of the other big things we need to advocate on. And then when it comes to targeting, we need to make sure that the following people are on board and ready to move us forward. That's the Speaker of the House, Mike Bush. He represents the Annapolis area. And the Senate President, Mike Miller, who represents parts of Prince George's and Charles County. And then our committee leadership, which is Derek Davis in the House, Eric Bromwell in the House, and Dolores Kelly in the Senate. Those folks kind of hold the cards, but we really need to work those committees. So it's really just about getting the word out, I think, is the biggest thing, because what we're fearing a little bit of opposition from would be the folks that own the trash incinerators. They seem to have a fair amount of influence, as well as people that are a little scared and nervous about moving toward 100% clean energy, that are worried they may lose jobs in the fossil fuel industry or something like that. That's where we're starting to see some of the concerns raised. So if we overcome those things and tell the legislators just how clearly we need more clean energy, that's our best path to victory right now in my mind.
And David, can I just add to that a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the important things about, and we have made some important changes, we think, in the Clean Energy Jobs Act itself. We do also think that with the progressive new legislature in a non-election year, with all this urgency about climate change, that these amendments actually have a pretty reasonable chance of moving forward. But not everybody agrees that we should have more onshore wind or offshore wind, and not everybody agrees that we should have more solar. And so it's that part of our support for clean energy means defending those things in the course of the legislative session. So showing up is important. We can't take any of this for granted because not everybody is on the page that they frankly need to be on.
All right. Next question is there any discussion on cogeneration and anaerobic digestion?
You want that? You want me to take that one, Al, or do you
Yeah,
want to
you
go?
better take that one.
Right.
I am not involved in any discussions of those things.
No problem. This is an issue that Sierra Club has worked on in the past. So anaerobic digestion of poultry litter is the primary resource here in Maryland. Essentially what that means is that you are pulling all of the chicken waste and chicken poop from a farm, putting it into a big fancy container. There's a much better way to describe this, but I'm going with it anyway. And you let it decompose anaerobically. You capture the gas that's associated with that and you burn it for power. You're still left with waste byproducts, which is one of our concerns, and you're still burning something, even if it is a byproduct gas. So what we are concerned about when it comes to anaerobic digestion being paired at the same level as wind and solar is that you're still burning something. So you're still getting some byproducts associated with that combustion, whereas with wind and solar, you don't have any of those combustion-based byproducts, as well as incentivizing combined animal feeding operations, which the Sierra Club has a lot of issues with when it comes to our agricultural program, as well as pollution in the Chesapeake Bay. So those are some of the issues that we find with anaerobic digestion. We are not specifically discussing that issue during this round of renewable portfolio standard discussions. At least we are not bringing it forward. We are prepared to respond to it should it come up, but we are more interested in, as Al noted, maximizing the amount of non-emitting clean energy associated with the RPS program. So there's a lot of, there's some different opinion across the environmental community when it comes to anaerobic digestion. Our main policy note for this is that it should not be receiving the same amount of incentive as wind and solar, but it is not an issue that we are actively bringing to the table this year, but we are ready to respond to it should other people bring it up.
Next question is asking for clarity on the point that the Clean Energy Jobs Act bill is requesting $20 million in funding for minority and women-owned businesses and job training.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to clarify at this moment. I think this is a piece of the bill that we're going to be better suited to respond to when we get the draft official legislative language back. But essentially what we're doing is Maryland has a large pot of money associated with strategic energy investments. The revenue comes from a wide variety of places that we can talk about more later, but essentially we are trying to ensure that part of that money is dedicated to fostering the development, providing, it might be there to provide loans or bonds or whatever, some kind of financial support for women and minority-owned businesses that want to enter into the clean energy economy more, to provide energy efficiency services, to build and deploy clean energy. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that can come out of that. But in addition to it, it also has a lot of funding for job training programs, trying to build more clean energy apprenticeship programs. And a lot of that work will come out of the Department of Labor and Licensing and Regulation, DLLR, in the state of Maryland. So there's some interesting programs that I'm happy to send as over the next coming weeks some more information about that. But it is something that we're really excited about to help spur the workforce development side and business development side in the state.
And for people who know programs, so one of the job-related programs is the EARN program, which has actually been quite successful. It's a public-private partnership where industries or businesses identify opportunities to train up people to work in their business or in their industry. And then there's cost sharing with the state. So it's a nice project, and it's not just all a state funded project, but it's actually, it builds the relationship with the industries themselves that need the people.
And then a question about the materials. Where can one find the technical study that shows it is feasible technically and economically to cover the no wind and no sun time periods with batteries?
Where? I don't have it at hand. Basically, there are we can look into, the legislative session is a difficult time to do research. So, but I'll try to find you a reference. I mean, one of the places that I usually go to is Resources for the Future. And also if anyone subscribes to Utility Dive, they have a collection of analytical articles and so on. And you might try Googling. That's always where I start. And you'll get, particularly if you go into Google Scholar, you'll get technical literature.
Okay. What do we subsidize now in terms of solar and wind?
So I can take a first crack at that. Yeah. I was going to say the way that our state incentive programs work for solar is a specific carve out within the renewable portfolio standard that has it's just a slightly different market system. So solar is very explicitly incentivized through our RPS program. Offshore wind has a similar carve out. There's a slightly different market, but counts to the total and aggregate, and that is incentivized differently. Those at the moment are relatively small. To be honest, we've seen exponential growth in solar because in the early 2000s we basically didn't have any. But we are our mandate is around 2.5% solar at the moment. We already exceed that pretty well. But in-state solar and in-state land wind really only make up 5 or 6% of Maryland's energy generation and consumption right now. So it's a pretty small number, which is why a 14.5% solar carve out would actually be a pretty big jump. Why mandating 10% offshore wind would be a pretty big jump, and something we really need to make sure happens. When it comes to federal subsidies and stuff for wind and solar, I know they exist. They're on schedules out. I'm not as well versed with that at the moment. I'm overloaded on Maryland policy, but those would be my short answers to that question.
Yeah, and I just add, so the offshore wind carve out and the offshore wind renewable energy credits, the ORECs that David talked about, actually was at the core of the deal that ultimately was approved by the Public Service Commission to allow the building of 2 offshore wind projects, which, as people know, is still a little bit of a political football, but the ORECs and that carve out were then negotiated in terms of the price. And once the award was made, that in its own way functioned as a guaranteed financing source that allowed those projects to, again, get the money to be built. The other thing about wind is there's a lot of wind that is being bought through the straight renewable energy credits that the state pays. So of that big, whatever the chunk is, I think it's 14.5% this year of our energy is supposed to be renewable. A fair chunk of that is not a carve out, but a big chunk of that is wind that are receiving those renewable energy credits. And that onshore wind, that's onshore wind. And that onshore wind is mostly not in Maryland. Maryland has not built a lot of onshore wind. So that's mostly in other places.
Is Sierra Club doing anything on the Green Amendment?
David, that was yours.
That one.
It's the coalition.
Yes, I need to see what my dog just ran away with. So the Green Amendment, we are talking with the coalition that's leading that now to better understand it. It doesn't sound like something we wouldn't support. I think that we have a lot of learning to do internally about it, but it's an exciting campaign. I will certainly say that it's about, providing basic environmental rights to the populace. So that's really exciting. And it's got a really good grassroots feel and energy to it because it's something that everybody should have. So I can't speak too much more to it yet. We're still exploring and learning more about it, but there's some exciting buildup going on around it.
Can you elaborate on the low-income provisions of the Clean Energy Jobs Act bill?
I think those are the ones that David, who just is chasing his dog, was talking about in terms of the those provisions are basically aimed at the training of workers and the specific support that's being given in terms of loans, credits, guarantees, indemnification to women-owned, minority, and other small businesses to allow them to participate in the clean energy economy. So the particularly the minority and women-owned business part is aimed at making sure that folks who might not ordinarily get a chance to participate do participate.
Eastern Shore residents are opposed to offshore wind projects. How do you defeat that?
David, I'll leave this one to you, but basically I think we're in contact with many Eastern Shore residents who actually are very positive about offshore wind. There has been a lot of wheel squeakiness from some parties, particularly in Ocean City. But yeah, in terms of how to campaign against it, it is a political issue. So I'll kick it to David.
Yeah, I think from our campaign perspective on offshore wind, so last year there was a bill introduced that would have pushed the two projects that were approved by the PSC back another number of miles off the coast. But the problem with that would have been that they're so far along their development process already, they essentially would have killed two offshore wind projects that everybody's excited about. And that's a problem. So we opposed that effort. I think that the main thing that we need to be working on when it comes to offshore wind is emphasizing that it is Maryland's, combined with solar, our largest resource available to us for actual clean, non-emitting renewable energy. We really need to develop that kind of space for us and make sure that it is a Maryland, Maryland-owned, Maryland exciting industry that our state is on the forefront of. So coupled with that is that how we explain that this is Maryland's economy that can grow as associated with it. It is where we can attract those industries and developers and companies and all sorts of other pieces that come along with growing a new industry. The offshore wind industry is in its infancy in the United States. We have one actual semi-large scale project, which is actually really only 5 turbines off the coast of Rhode Island. Maryland is on pace to have the biggest.
State.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's really exciting what they're doing in Rhode Island. But Maryland's program would blow that out of the water, and then Massachusetts would blow Maryland out of the water, like really, really a lot. So we need to make sure that we are keeping up with this. But Europe is miles ahead of us in terms of using offshore wind and developing that technology. We need to bring that to the U.S. so that we're not just shipping everything over from Europe in terms of parts and labor and everything. So we want to grow that industry here in the state of Maryland. I think that economic argument is really how we win on offshore wind.
Does the bill address electric cars and charging stations?
This bill does not, but we have many other bills that do address that issue. So the Clean Energy Jobs Act that we are advocating to strengthen does not have anything with electric vehicles or charging stations, but we have plenty of other bills that if you still email that legislation@mdsierra.org email address, we are really gearing up in the transportation sector, supporting electric vehicle bills, supporting charging station bills, all sorts of cool stuff on the transportation side.
Yeah, and I would just add that I'm not a legislative, highly experienced expert, but one thing I've learned is that not everything can fit in one bill. You have to do things in pieces. It's just like right now we've got the long-term contracts bill and the Clean Energy Jobs Act. They're both, and that's why we call this a legislative strategy, along with the amendment part. So it's very hard to, if a bill gets too complicated and tries to do too many things at once, it's very likely to fail. So it's better to have discrete pieces. So there's a lot, as David said, going on with electric vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure, charging, and so on. And Sierra Club and the environmental community are very involved in that. It's just not in this bill or these bills. Right.
So it is 8 o'clock, and I don't see any raised hands from anyone on the call, but I do want to very briefly open up the line to see if anyone has questions they'd like to ask. So I'm going to unmute everyone, but I'd ask that if you don't have a question or don't have anything you'd like to say, keep yourself on mute so we can, or mute yourself so we can cut down on any potential background noise. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone for a moment.
So that's just something, there's no bill about it yet. It's the future. Oh, yeah.
Any questions from folks on the line?
Hey, don't go crazy on the treats. Don't lure him and then he doesn't like what you're doing, okay?
Okay. So
Hey, this is Rich. I'd like to comment about the.
Hey, Rich, give me 1 second. I'm going to mute everyone again and unmute you.
that was fun. All right.
Okay,
Rich, go ahead.
Sure, I'd like to comment. I just saw a news article, and I just looked it up in the Baltimore Sun, and that is the Maryland Public Services Commission has authorized the installation of 5,000 charging stations, and this is going to be provided by the utilities, not by Tesla. So that might help answer the question. As far as the offshore wind on the Eastern Shore, there is a lot of support for it. The government of Ocean City is opposed to it, but there's support in Salisbury and other communities on the Eastern Shore. So we're not really working against the people on the Eastern Shore. So I just wanted to emphasize those 2 points. Oh, I'd also like to comment about the battery issue. Batteries are getting less expensive. And what's really interesting is that as this ramps up, batteries are not all that important, as when wind and solar are a relatively small portion of the energy mix, and it becomes more important as it ramps up. And fortunately, while it's ramping up, the cost of batteries is dropping precipitously. As Al said, there's this big program in California, major utility, to basically replace 3 peaker plants with combined alternative energy and batteries.
This is Steve Foote. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Go, Steve.
Okay. So I'm looking forward to lobby night, and I'm trying to get a clear picture of where we stand in terms of a timeline of having the bill in a form that can be introduced so that we know what we're talking about.
Great question, Steve. This is David. I'll take that one. Very, very soon. We are getting bill draft language, or language back from bill drafters next week, and we're really excited to move forward with it. So we will have final bill language. Bills will be introduced and publicly available on the Maryland General Assembly website very soon in the coming days and weeks. And we will have, updated fact sheets with bill numbers and all sorts of stuff to circulate after that. We will be fully prepared for lobby night with all of the final bills set and ready to go.
That's great. And are we what's our level of confidence that we could reasonably tell our legislators that all of the major environmental groups are supporting that version of the bill?
Another great question. When it comes to actual lobby night, some of that will be figured out in February. We don't know when the hearing for the bill will be and when the committee may or may not vote for it. So if the bill is in its current state that we anticipate it being introduced, my understanding is that many groups and coalitions support the bill as it will be introduced. The Sierra Club and a handful of other organizations will be supportive with amendments in the sense that we want to strengthen the bill. But we wouldn't say as some, we may see some utilities or something like that, or some other organizations or businesses come in and say, we support this bill with amendments, but only if you do these exact specific things that we're saying. We are in a space of the introduction of the bill as we're currently anticipating it is good. It's a good vehicle. It'll grow clean energy, but we want to see it strengthened because we know we need to in order to address the climate science that is out there in front of us. So that's the current characterization for us, and we are really dedicated to those amendments and want to make sure that if they are still on if the amendments are still available for us to pursue at lobby night, we're going to be asking for people to support the Clean Energy Jobs Act and support our strengthening amendments for it.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, and Steve, just briefly, that those introductory slides that I put up about the process that we went through with the Vermont Law School and all the other things that involved the whole Maryland Climate Coalition, which is one of the major groupings of environmental organizations, and the whole point of that was to get to the essentially develop the pieces that we're talking about now, including the fact that they're aware that we're going to push for strengthening amendments, but that we also support the bill. They support the bill. We all support the long-term contracts bill. So we're confident that we've got a lot of the environment community pushing in the same direction this time. And the one thing I just wanted to add is not everybody is necessarily a legislative scholar, as I am not. And so it is a two-phase process. The reason that, David had those lists of target legislators, and that's in the context of committees, because the first big obstacle for a bill is to make it through a committee and come out in good shape. So that people have mutilated it to the point you don't want it anymore. So that's the first round of battles and votes. After that, then it goes to the whole floor of the legislature in the particular house, and hopefully it goes to the floor in both houses. And that's when we really want to reach out to everybody. So it is a two-stage process, committees first, and then the general legislature second, and we have to work at both stages. If you don't make it through the first one, you don't get to the second one.
This is Stan. Can you hear me?
Yes, Dan.
I just put a message written, but basically we're planning to have a small delegation go to speak to Benjamin Kramer within the next week or two. And just want to know if there are any people on this call from District 19 who would be constituents of Ben Kramer. And if so, can they get in touch with me, or either that or respond? But my email address is stanboyd908@gmail.com. If you could get in touch with me, I would really appreciate it, so we can go ahead and get a date and let you know what dates are available.
Okay, thank you, Stan. So I think we should probably wrap this. Thanks, everybody. It's 8:10, so in respecting people's time, I will just reiterate what I said at the very beginning when only a few people were on, that your prize for participating in this evening's session is that those who registered, actually, some of whom weren't able to make it, will get an email in a few days that will include the lobby night sign up, the slides, the fact sheets for the bills and amendments that we're supporting, the link to the video of this webinar, and an action alert that you can do what David said. You can fill it out, but also add your own comments, and that will go to your particular legislator. So, so look for that.
Hey, Al.
Yeah.
I apologize for interrupting you in the closing remarks, but I saw in the chat box, we have had someone waiting patiently since early on, I think, in this to actually speak. So I know it's late if people need to jump off, but I did want to provide, I think the username is R Parks, the opportunity to speak before we jump off.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I just wanted to say good evening, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to learn a little bit more on the 100% Clean Energy Act. My name is Renard Parks, and my company is Navita Solar USA. We're a solar manufacturing company here in Baltimore City. And we are one of those companies who would be able to, well, one, we're interested in any way possible how we can help the Sierra Club. We are a part of the Baltimore People's Climate Movement. So we're trying to get a little bit more information on how we can get involved in the actual act and get into the meetings and see how we can play a role, because we do have workforce development, and with manufacturing coming back to the city, we will be able to fill a lot of those needs as far as solar is concerned, as far as jobs and being able to talk with the trash incinerator and how we can help only the 70 odd employees there, being able to employ 200 plus people. So whoever we can talk to help our company, or even just help the act involved, any way we can, impossible. We can do that. Also, the PACE program, Property Assessed Clean Energy, is now here in Baltimore and Maryland and the surrounding counties. And we believe that we'll be able to help drive up not only just construction jobs and small jobs like doors and windows and things of that nature, but solar is within that PACE portion. Right. And it's finance money that's coming from private capital, so it's not coming from taxpayer dollars. So though the solar farms, are pretty much having a stall in the county, we do have an opportunity with PACE to kind of not only scale up jobs, but the sustainability conversation in Maryland, I believe. So any help we can get, or any help we can be for the group, we would love to. So I'm going to put the website here and the actual comments in our email. And if you guys have any questions or just any information you can help us out with how we can be a part, that would be great.
Thank you. That's great. And PACE is a great program. You're right. There are lots of opportunities, particularly Baltimore City. It's a really, really important, obviously, place. And so, is it Robert?
Renard.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, could you just email me? It's my name. It's Alfred Bartlett, ALFRED BARTLETT, 2 T's at the end, at msn.com.
All right, great. Bartlett, B-L-A-R.
No, B-A-B-A-R-T-L-E-T-T, like pears, Bartlett.
Okay.
At MSN, Microsoft Network, msn.com. First name's Alfred, A-L-F-R-E-D. No dots, no spaces, all lowercase. Yeah, and I think, there may be if you all can, David coordinates all the stuff about testimony and things like that, but there may be opportunities, and certainly like a lobby night, if you could take the time to come, that would be cool also to, sit down with legislators and let them know what you just said.
Thank you. I definitely will email you guys and just see how we can be a help. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
No problem.
Yeah, the print in this little chat box is so small, I actually can't barely see it. But anyway, okay, so that was it. That closing message. Thanks, Bernard. And you all will get a contact that'll have more information and more things you can do. The slide set will include that one at the end that gives you the web link and the email link that you can use to sign up if you want to do more. And since we know your email addresses, we will keep in touch with you all. Thank you for your interest. Thanks for taking the time this evening. Thanks for letting us run over. And good night.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.